targeting those who are deemed most responsible for the human rights abuses, likely referring to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un himself. Kan Hyung-woo starts us off.
For the 14th consecutive year, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution on Monday local time in New York criticizing the systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations in North Korea. The non-binding resolution emphasizes that member states are deeply concerned at the grave human rights situation and the lack of accountability for human rights violations under the regime. Condemning the use of torture in the North, the resolution also criticized the inhumane conditions of detention, public executions, and the existing system of political prison camps. The Assembly's adoption of such a resolution comes at a time where the denuclearization talks between Pyongyang and Washington appear to have stalled, pointing out the lack of progress in addressing the human rights issues in the North. The resolution urges the UN Security Council to consider further sanctions on the regime to aim at those most responsible for human rights violations, seen as a clear reference to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But North Korea's ambassador to the UN rebuked the allegations, calling them the most despicable false allegations made up by a number of defectors who escaped the regime after committing crimes.
The draft resolution has nothing to do with genuine human rights, as it is product of political plot on the hostile forces that try to disgrace the image of DPRK.
But the resolution, unlike previous versions, added a part that says it welcomes the ongoing diplomatic efforts with the regime and notes the importance of dialogue and engagement for the improvement of the human rights and humanitarian situation in North Korea. The text of the resolution was jointly penned by Japan and the European Union with contributions from other member states, including South Korea. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
Now, the free trade deal between the European Union and South Korea, now into its 8th year, requires both parties to implement sustainable development commitments, including the improvement of labour rights. Yet, the EU is demanding an official consultation with Seoul, saying it hasn't exerted sufficient efforts to ratify the conventions of the UN Agency on Labour. Kim Hyo-sun with the details.
The European Union is urging the South Korean government to ratify the International Labour Organization, or ILO, conventions. The statement released by the European Commission on Monday asks Seoul to engage in formal consultations with the EU on labour issues. It explained that the two parties pledged to improve labour rights and working conditions under a dispute settlement mechanism in the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter in their FTA concluded in 2011. However, it stated that efforts exerted by Seoul so far are insufficient. South Korea joined the ILO in 1991 but has only ratified 29 conventions out of a total of 189, which include abolition of forced labor and freedom of association and protection of the right to organize and the right to collective bargaining. The EU's FTA with Seoul was its first agreement that included the TSD chapter, but the clause is now contained in its FTAs with Canada, Singapore, and Japan. It marks the first time Brussels has demanded government-to-government consultations on the issue. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
President Moon Jaein has suggested the government may need to rein in some of its policies, like its big minimum wage hikes, in order to stimulate healthier economic growth in the nation. He's called for people in South Korea to be patient, as the policies his administration wants to institute may take some time to show the results. Our Shin Se-min reports.
President Moon Jaein, for the first time, has introduced coming up with measures to complement some of the economic policies the government has introduced this year. Chairing the extended ministerial meeting on the economy in another first, it was a show of determination that his administration will be zeroing in on the economy next year. And to spur on the slowing economy, he said the government might slow down the pace at which it's raising the minimum wage, given the backlash from small businesses and the self-employed.
최저임금 인상, 노동시간 단축과 같은 새로운 경제정책은 경제 사회의 수용성과 이해관계자의 입장을 조화롭게 고려해 국민의 공감 속에서 추진하는 것이 무엇보다 중요합니다. 필요한 경우 보완 조치도 함께 강구해야 할 것입니다.
He said the same goes for other key economic policies, ordering his officials to be cautious when it comes to the policy's possible adverse repercussions. The idea of slowing down the wage hike is in tune with what Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said when he told lawmakers that in the new year he will take into account the acceptability of a wage hike to the market. Employers have complained that they can't afford the new wages, which have gone up some 11% this year alone. They say they have had to lay people off to make ends meet. President Moon also said the government should aggressively get rid of obstacles to corporate investment because weak investment has added downward pressure on the economy already grappling with slowing exports. When it comes to his administration's core economic initiative of inclusive growth, President Moon stood firm. He called for patience and trust until the policies bear fruit and ordered his officials to prove to the public with achievements that the policies are in fact heading in the right direction. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea's new finance minister is projecting the country's economy to grow in 2019 at a rate similar to this year, at 2.6 to 2.7%. He also stressed the importance of making growth inclusive, noting how the global economy is itself at a turning point as wealth polarization gets even worse. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
In a briefing held on Monday concerning the government's economic plans for next year, the Minister of Economy and Finance, Hong Nam-gi, said the government's emphasis on inclusive growth is vital as the local economy faces growing external risks, including the trade protectionism, which are expected to further affect Korea's exports. Even though household income and domestic consumption have risen, he said there's still work to be done when it comes to economic indicators in employment and income distribution, and he said the government's plans are focused on these issues.
Venture capital investments reached a record high of nearly $2.7 billion this year, and new startups, particularly among the youth, are rising. However, investment from the private sector, the main source of jobs, is still sluggish.
While the government strengthens its drive to deregulate, it will also come up with ways for both traditional and new innovative industries to prosper together. The minister also said the government will come up with measures by the end of this year to spur innovation in the languid manufacturing sector, as well as measures to revitalize promising areas of the services sector and to help the self-employed. Hong also vowed by February to reform the process that determines the country's minimum wage increases in a way that will improve its predictability and fairness so that all parties in the labor market can accommodate the changes, starting with the wage increases for 2020. He pledged to work on expanding the flexible work system from the current 3 months also by February, indicating that the government will continue to support the 52-hour weekly cap on working hours. Through these efforts, Hong said the government aims to achieve an annual growth rate of 2.6% or 2.7% for next year, downgraded from the previous 2.8% forecast earlier this year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
So let's start where we have been starting our international news for quite the number of days now. In the UK, British Prime Minister Theresa May has rescheduled a parliamentary vote on her unpopular Brexit bill for the 3rd week of January, so in about a month's time. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Aram. So Aram, we have about 4 weeks left now. Do we expect anything to be any different then?
Well, Mark, unfortunately for Mrs May, it's more of the same. MPs are still hostile towards May's Brexit deal, despite her insisting she got what she called reassurances from her EU counterparts on the contentious issue of the Irish backstop, which MPs fear would keep the UK under EU customs rules indefinitely.
My fellow EU leaders could not have been clearer. They do not want to use this backstop. They want to agree the best possible future relationship with us. There is no plot to keep us in the backstop. They go further than the EU has ever done previously in trying to address the concerns of this House.
The Prime Minister also urged Parliament to back the agreement in order to avoid a no-deal scenario.
I know this is not everyone's perfect deal, it is a compromise. But if we let the perfect be the enemy of the good, then we risk leaving the EU with no deal.
The main opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, meanwhile, lashed out at May for delaying the vote, saying she was leading the UK into a national crisis. He also called on the Prime Minister to hold the vote sooner.
It is clear, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has failed to renegotiate her deal, failed to get any meaningful reassurances. There is no excuse for any more dither or delay.
May hit back, saying the Labour Party had no alternative to her plan, accusing it of putting political interests before the interests of the public. Meanwhile, Corbyn has tabled a motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister. The move is aimed at putting pressure specifically on Mrs May rather than her government, and it is also not legally binding. In other news, President Trump has once again lashed out at the US Federal Reserve for considering another interest rate hike. In a tweet on Monday, just 2 days before the Fed is expected to raise rates, Trump said he found it, quote, incredible the US central bank would consider the move amid a strong dollar and what he called virtually no inflation. He also mentioned the economic slowdowns in France and China, urging the Fed to, quote, take the victory. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro also expressed similar sentiment a few hours after Trump's tweet. The president has repeatedly criticized the Fed for increasing rates, saying it interferes with its economic policies. However, Bloomberg reported last month that rate hikes would cut into his own fortune by increasing payments on his variable rate loans. At least 6 people have died in a fire that broke out in a hospital in the Indian city of Mumbai. More than 140 others are also said to have been injured, some of them critically. Officials said the blaze has been put out and that scores of people had been rescued from the burning building. The exact cause of the fire is still unknown and is being investigated. Accidental fires are common across India, especially in densely populated Mumbai, due to poor safety standards and lax enforcement of regulations.
South Korean officials and experts returned home on Monday after an almost 2-week inspection of North Korea's eastern rail line. Upon their return, the team said the two Koreas share a vision of connecting their rail networks, but it will take some time to devise specific plans for construction. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Oh Jung-hee with the details.
South and North Korea wrapped up their joint inspections of railways in North Korea and are well on the way to the groundbreaking ceremony scheduled next week. 28 South Korean officials and experts who had been in the north for an on-site survey of the eastern Donghae rail line returned home on Monday. Since December 8th, they've been checking the section between the North's Kumgangsan Mountain and Tumangang River, moving by bus and train with their North Korean counterparts.
On the Donghae line, our final point was a friendship bridge between North Korea and Russia. It was very touching for all 28 of us to have completed the inspections up until there.
I believe a lot of us dream of coming and going between the south and north through that route we've never taken and being connected to the continent via train. We shared such determination with our North Korean counterparts.
It was the first time South Koreans have surveyed the eastern Donghae line. Moving along almost 800 kilometers of railway, the inspectors focused on the rail operation system and the structures, like tracks, bridges, and tunnels, using testing devices from the south to help them.
About 10 kilometers of bridges and tunnels between Kumgangsan Mountain and Anbyeon had especially deteriorated. Technicians say trains aren't running there and can run in some sections only when necessary. Up to the Tumangang River, trains can run at a speed of 30 kilometers per hour. The rail condition isn't too good, and we thought it'd be impossible for speedy operation.
Train cars of both south and north traveled together throughout the inspection. There were 11 carriages in total, with 5 from Pyongyang and 6 from Seoul.
When moving on the train, experts gathered together to share what they had surveyed and what needs to be done. They had discussions in various fields.
The South Korean team added there should be additional surveys and knowledge sharing with the North to take further steps. This completes the two Koreas' overall joint railway inspections. They took a look at the Western Gyeonggi rail line 2 weeks ago and cross-border sections back in July. Seoul and Pyongyang will hold a groundbreaking ceremony next week at the North's Panmun station to mark the start of connecting and modernizing roads and railways between each other. Seoul is sending an advance team to the location this week. But actual construction will start later in accordance with the North's denuclearization and waivers on sanctions. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Now, shifting gears, stricter digital sex crime punishments will be implemented in South Korea from today as the nation aims to crack down on illegal videos being uploaded onto the internet. Under the new regulations, those found guilty of posting videos of a sexual nature on the web without the other person's consent will face up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $26,000. That's up from the previous maximum prison sentence of 3 years and roughly $9,000 fines. Those who profit from the illegal uploads will face up to 7 years behind bars. The South Korean National Anthem has gotten a makeover to give it a more modern feel. The new version was revealed for the first time on Monday, and we're going to bring a bit of it to you now. Our Jae-in has the details.
The South Korean National Anthem, or 애국가, as it's known in Korea, which depicts the beauty and pride Koreans have for their country, is getting a makeover for the first time in nearly 23 years. Comparing the prelude, the new version gives the anthem a more powerful feel as it adds brass and woodwind instruments to the arrangement. The new anthem was arranged by music director Park In-young and recorded by the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra and Seoul Metropolitan Choir.
We did our best not to change Anik Tae's original version too much, but we gave it a more modern spin.
In 2005, Anik Tae's family donated the copyright of the sheet music to the government. However, with the source music under its own copyright, changing the national anthem had its limitations until recently, when the source music's copyright was also donated to the state.
It was initially donated in the form of sheet music, so there was a limit to its use. Now that the source music copyright has been donated, it's fully owned by the Korean people.
The new version of South Korea's national anthem can be listened to in full on the Korea Copyright Commission's website. 이승재, Arirang News.
High-flying business travellers have selected Seoul as the best place in the world for international gatherings. It's wonderful news for the city, as the South Korean capital has been striving to become one of the top choices for global conventions and exhibitions for the past several years now. Oh Se-young reports.
Seoul has been named the best city in the world to hold meetings, conferences and exhibitions for the 4th consecutive year. Seoul Metropolitan Government said Monday that the city topped travel magazine Global Travelers' annual rankings, which are based on a survey of 105,000 frequent business travellers and high-income subscribers. Dubai came in second place, followed by Singapore, London and Hong Kong. Seoul first claimed the top spot in 2013 before losing out to Singapore the following year. But since 2015, South Korea's capital city has remained the most attractive destination for business gatherings and exhibitions.
International visitors have noted Seoul's unique harmony of traditional and modern qualities, as well as convenient accommodation, transportation, and conference facilities. We plan to continue growing the MICE sector in scale and quality, as well as supporting workers in the industry.
The mice industry has been one of South Korea's key growth sectors since 2009, when the central government officially identified the sector as one of its 17 new growth engine industries. Among the scores of large-scale global conferences held in the Korean capital, major milestones include the G20 Seoul Summit in 2010 and 2 nuclear security summits. Based on a report last year by the Union of International Associations, South Korea has been the world's top destination for international meetings for 2 straight years, with nearly 1,300 meetings hosted in the country in 2017. That accounts for some 13% of the total number of international meetings that year. In terms of cities, Seoul ranked third with 688 meetings, following Singapore and Brussels. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Arirang TV, the channel you're watching right now, has been developing a new way to record and air shows using smartphones, and it's using this method for the very first time to broadcast live a special Christmas show by our radio department. Hong Yu tells us more.
Arirang TV has taken its use of smartphones to the next level. After its success using smartphones to make news reports, Arirang TV is now broadcasting a show live, recorded entirely on smartphones. On Monday, Arirang Radio opened up its studio to its listeners to celebrate Christmas with live performances from K-pop stars. These performances were aired live and watched all around the world on Arirang Radio's YouTube and VLive accounts. But instead of cameras, smartphones did the job of recording the show. Arirang TV has developed a smartphone broadcasting system that uses several smartphones to deliver live performances. With this new system, broadcasting live has become simpler and cheaper. The number of people needed to do such a job has been reduced from more than 20 to less than 5 people. And now 4 or 5 smartphones can do the job of an outside broadcast fan. Monday's show, called Turn Up Party Radio Gaga, featured K-pop stars Yubin, Hotshot, Dreamcatcher, and Intuit, and was broadcast live on YouTube and VLive. For those that missed the live broadcast, the show will be aired on Christmas from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Good morning. Many areas of Gyeonggi-do province are battling air pollution, but overall, the Ministry of Environment is saying air conditions have improved compared to yesterday. But those of us in the Central West regions could have another choking day, so be sure to check the dust levels before heading out today. And temperatures will be even milder than yesterday, hovering way above the norms. And the weather will stay relatively mild with highs in the upper single digits. And for a closer look at today's temperatures, there will be milder highs at 7 degrees Celsius here in the capital, double digits for the southern provinces. And skies will be partly cloudy to clear across the country. Now, Friday's daily highs could rise to 9 degrees before the readings dip down to cold levels again. And it's going to be fairly chilly on Christmas with no snow in the forecast for now. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave the news for now on this Tuesday morning here in Seoul. Do stay tuned to us on Arirang TV. And a reminder that we'll have our next newscast coming up at noon, Korea time, in around 90 minutes with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.
Literally speaking, a piece of